well.
Yeah. No, so do you run like touching, if it comes through the same way or differently about what you were just saying about demons in your head, or?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of people really struggle. So I'll go back a little bit just to kind of tell where we came to that was talking about imagination, and I was specifically talking about men, but women also tend to have a point in their lives where they're told their imaginary friends aren't real, and when that happens, there's a compression that happens within people that says, I'm not allowed to look at this energy authentically. I have to shove it aside because I'm told that this is not supposed to be real. The truth is, it's very real to you. In the same way, these voices that come into your head and these energies that come into your head and these demons that are always talking to you all the time, they're not something that needs to be rejected. They're not something that needs to be pushed against. They're not something that needs to be argued with in the sense that what they're saying is wrong. To them, they love you so much and they're looking from a roadmap of experience, of the things that you have been through throughout your life. And they're saying, last time you did this, you were hurt, and we don't want you to get hurt. So we're going to keep telling you these things, trying to keep you safe because of all of these different imprints that you've been through. We don't know what can happen. And your work within that is not to argue with them and not to fight them and not to say, no, you're wrong. It's to simply just acknowledge that, hey, these things love me. These things are there for me to try and help me to grow in some way. They just don't have the big picture. They're not able to be visionary. And so you have to realize that it's not me versus them, it's me and them, and I can use their information, and I can use my information, I can use my friend's information, and then I can come from a point of integrity, not programming, and make new decisions and communicate with those things and say, hey, committee in my head, I really appreciate you being here because you have really helped me make decisions along the way. You've allowed me to go through things, and maybe they weren't my preference at the time. And maybe I don't like what you say to me all the time, because there's plenty of my friends that I don't like what they say to me all the time. But I know that these things are always a channel of my consciousness back to me. And when I allow that to come back to me and really take ownership of the fact that all of these things are lovingly trying to help me grow, then I can say, oh, I really appreciate what you're saying to me here, but I've grown from this. I'm not going to get hurt in that same way. And if I do, I needed to get hurt in that same way. Will you let me move forward with this? Can I have your permission to release this program? And they want to. They don't want to keep holding you there. They don't want to hold you back. They're just trying to keep you safe. And
what do you see what happens when like you said, when the suppression of imagination and stuff comes up? And I brought this up because of specifically men that I've known that it's so clear to me they've just been told that, at some point they're probably the most spiritually sensitive. Mm-hmm. And so they had very vivid things come through. And now, like, I'm lovingly going to call them batshit crazy, but, like, they're just, like, frenetic messes. Yeah. And, like, you see they can never concentrate. They're floating from one thing to the next thing. They, like, they may be unreliable. Like, they just kind of...
It's a huge fear program. So you have to realize when...
they think they're grasping at straws here and there. Like, this is... Oh, I'm doing better. And they're never allowed to not be okay. Yeah. At the same time.
There's such a paradigm that's created within them because they don't feel like they're enough as they are. Right? And there's so many, it's not like I'm not doing enough, or I am not enough as I am, I'm not good enough. Whatever these stories are really deep. It's not just those words, right? It's an energy with which they express everything that they do. And so when you have that childhood program, when you are told that what you are feeling is not correct, that immediately creates a barrier to you being able to express what you're going through, or sit in what you're going through, or translate what you're going through in a way that it allows you to actually use it as the signal that it's meant to be. Because all of these experiences, all these emotions, they're just meant to be signals. And when we're told that that one signal is right, one signal is wrong, it negates the fact that the signal is just information. And so as we get older and we start to live through the patterns that program created, those get deeper and deeper in the layers of who we're showing up as. And so our ego is not a bad thing to be rejected, but something that we want to understand is the anchor point from which we create our identity, from which we create our reality. And that ego wants to keep us safe. And so there's two different paradigms that conflict within that. It's one that it starts here and it says, I'm going to be right here in this point, and this is a safe point because I know it. But also that it's saying, this is the arrow. So we're going to point in the right direction so that we can go where we're going from this standpoint of identity. And when that identity is created from wounds, and when that identity is created from illness, and you have an identity in that illness, whether it's mental or it's a viewpoint on reality, or a viewpoint on your emotions, or a viewpoint on all these things that you're experiencing.
Saying you don't need a diagnosis for it to be your identity.
Exactly, and it creates an inability to really express and feel what you're actually feeling. And so these people who suffer that way, where they have, maybe they're bipolar, or maybe they have all of these insights that come in that they've really learned not to trust. And so there's this huge conflict within them, this turmoil that has this loving information that's coming in, and this committee that says, I need to keep you safe, and they're not sure where to listen. And they don't have tools with who to listen to, really, because there's been so much programming that says what you feel is wrong that they're like, I can't trust it. And so part of that game for them is really to regain their power. And so that's a simple way of saying, how can they start to say, what I am thinking and what I am feeling is what I'm thinking and feeling. And so if you can take, I had this thought that came in, and not say, I don't want this thought, but to say, this thought is just the one that's coming across the screen right now, let me read it, and say, what is this thought telling me about the underlying energies with which I am actually creating the things around me? And then say, does this thought and this energy match who I want to be? Because at the end of the day, the only one who gives you permission to show up in the way that you want to show up is you. And then if you have this list of people that you say, I want them to like me, so I need to make sure that I twist this part of me and this part of me and this part of me so that they like me when they look at me, then you're suddenly creating, if you think of that alignment as a channel, and so you have all of these different pieces that can rotate. And if you are rotating all of these pieces so that this piece aims at that person and this piece aims at that person, then you have so many pieces that are not actually
the messed up spine.
Channel. Well, it's the same exact thing, right? And so you have this channel of energy that is not able to flow correctly because it's trying to go in the wrong direction. And you have a conflict state that happens within you, and then disease and mental issues and all of these things arise from that. The game within that is to say, I don't need to please somebody else. I need to orient to myself first as the beacon, and then allow that to express and create the people and the situations that I want to organize with.
Well, I have two questions that would come up from that. Is one, like, okay, I can see many people listening and be like, oh, this makes so much sense, and then they go off and they're like, okay, that made sense, but what the fuck now? Yeah. So, like, what should people do? And then the second, like, where might they start, for example? And then the second thing would be, like, I can also see a lot of that turning into directing anger at their parents or whoever raised them.
That's a really, I want to mention that one first, because that's a really cool comment. I forget where I read this. It might have been the Gospel of Thomas, or it's probably somewhere in the Bible. But what it was you cannot truly love your parents unless you hate your parents. And the reason that he said that was that you have to realize that you chose your parents. And you signed contracts with them.
And that's a big stretch for a lot of people.
It will be, but it's more. It gives you more power. Mm-hmm. So, good point. So whether they choose to believe that or not is up to them. So if they choose that narrative, it is more powerful to them to choose that than to give their power away and say it was random.
I was just reading about choosing your own belief system yesterday.
And so if they come from the standpoint that I chose my parents and I signed contracts with them to traumatize me in just the right way, that I would have the right soul lessons at the right times of life so that I could evolve into the person my soul really wanted me to be, there's a lot of gratitude in that. However, you need to hate your parents for that because they traumatized you, right? So there's a period where you both hate and love your parents for what they did for you.
Talk about those facing different directions,
right? Yeah, and that's what it is. And there's this huge process where you have to emancipate from your parents, because you have to then say, oh, I'm not getting nurturing from my mother or my father or the support that I think I'm supposed to be getting from
that's
these
the
parents.
last thing you want to do is emancipate, because you're like, I want them to love me the way I want
and so
them
you
to
hold
love
on
me.
to them, and then you try to get it from all of your relationships, not realizing that your parents had parents who traumatized them in the same way, and they are souls and they are humans going through the same exact process and fucking up the same way you have, and having the same committee and the same self-sacrifice paradigms that show up that they are trying to learn, that their soul's trying to teach them, the same way that you have an opportunity to do.
It's not up to us to make the choice.
And it's not up to us to say our work is more important to them or ours is different. Than they're doing the same exact thing. And so there's a point where you can come back from that hate and start to love the fact that your parents are doing the same stuff as you. And then you can connect with them because you're both doing the same work.
I know you've had a lot of...
And I've had a lot of that. And
extreme examples, yeah.
And there is a lot of extreme examples of those kinds of things. And everybody will have... The thing I'd like
Which
to
is
remind
going to help
people...
you teach, in my opinion.
It is. Yeah. But the thing is, like,
you.
the pains that somebody goes through, whether it's with their parents or relationships or physical stuff that shows up in their life or traumas of any kind, that trauma to them is the hardest thing they've ever been through. It is no different than the hardest thing I've been through. My scale of it, now if they went through what I went through, it might be harder for them. But what they went through was the hardest thing they've been through, right? And that's all that matters. So there's not like, oh, he had it worse than me or he had it better than me. We've all had it worse as we possibly could in the ways that we needed to have it so that we could learn those lessons. You know, you see kids with a silver spoon, they have issues in the same way we do that we wouldn't want. You know, that we would struggle with the same way that they struggle with if we had that same catalyst. And so it's a matter of understanding that nobody started where you started. Nobody had the parents you had. Nobody had the catalyst that you had. Nobody had the blessings that you had or the obstacles that you had. And so nobody has the complete information that you have in this moment to make decisions. No one. Right?
This sounds like an advanced children's book. Like, it's all about you.
Well, it is. Like, it is. Like, literally. Like, if you really reflect on it, like, the amount of times that you've had something happen to you, you know, yeah, everybody has similar stories. All of our wounds are trauma, abuse, neglect, abandonment, right? And, like, all of those different themes are pervasive in everyone's life. They're the soul lessons everyone is effectively learning to overcome so that they can show up in an embodied way. But the journey through those is different. Therefore, the moment that you're at now, your knowledge of your information is more vast than what your parents will ever know, than what your best friend will know, than what anybody else will know, because you can't possibly have shared all that information with somebody else because they can't even handle their own information, right? And so we can always just kind of step back out of that, even though we're asking advice from friends, we're asking advice from people, understanding that the advice coming in is just a channeling of your consciousness back to you because you're the one who has that information. And using that as not right or wrong or should do this or to distort that can be really empowering for a lot of people. And so the reason I go through that is to remind you that the areas where you are doubting your own power, you're doubting your own wisdom, you're doubting your own awareness of what's going on, because you've gone through these things, you have the most information. So you're the one who can make the choice based on that information. You're the one who chose your parents to catalyze that growth. And so if you can take ownership of that fact, even if you don't necessarily believe it yet, but if you can step back and say, well, what would happen if I looked at it from the standpoint of me choosing that? And so I chose that they would do these things to me, or that I would have this terrible thing happen to me. What happens if I look through that lens? What happens if I start to look through that narrative and say, this was all something I asked for in some way? How can I start to translate the things that happened such that I can be empowered by those things rather than restrained by those things? And that's a question really to sit with. That's not